The underground arena of Nexus 7 pulsed with anticipation as holographic displays flickered through betting odds and fighter statistics. Neon advertisements cast their garish glow across the crystalline form of Krasthul, the undefeated champion of the fighting pits, as he prepared for his 200th match. In the observation deck above the arena, a group of wealthy consortium merchants pressed against the transparent aluminum windows, their multiple eyes fixed on the Drachnid warrior below. They had traveled 16 parsecs to witness what many considered the peak of evolutionary combat perfection. Krasthul stood motionless in his preparation chamber, his naturally grown crystal armor refracting the harsh lights into deadly rainbows across the walls. The chamber's automated systems worked methodically around him, scanning his crystalline structure for imperfections and measuring the atomic alignment of his armor. 200 cycles of combat had transformed his exoskeleton into a living weapon, each layer grown and honed through combat experience. Final diagnostic complete, announced the chamber's eye. Crystal lattice integrity at 99.98%. Combat efficiency rating maximum. The Drachnid warrior didn't acknowledge the report. He never did. Speech was inefficient before combat, and inefficiency was weakness. Instead, he focused on his opponent's data streaming across his neural interface. A Jovian war beast from the outer colonies, genetically engineered for survival in Jupiter's crushing gravity. It had killed 36 previous opponents. The betting odds gave it a 12% chance of survival beyond the first minute. The arena's atmospheric processors hummed to life, adjusting the gravity and air pressure to standard competition levels. In the crowded stands, members of a dozen different species shifted in their seats, some requiring specialized breathing apparatus to survive in the regulated environment. They had all paid exorbitant prices to witness what promised to be another display of precise, emotionless execution. In the red quarter, boomed the announcement system in 15 different languages, challenging for the title of Arena Champion, the Jovian Nightmare, Crusher of Bones, Render of Flesh, Guar on. The massive war beast emerged from its chamber, each step leaving small craters in the reinforced floor. Its engineered muscles rippled beneath armor plating, and its multiple rows of teeth gleamed under the arena lights. The crowd roared its approval, though many had already placed bets on how quickly it would die. And in the blue quarter, the announcer continued, undefeated for 200 cycles, the perfect weapon, the crystal death, the emotionless one. Kraz, Hul. The champion stepped into the arena without ceremony or acknowledgement of the crowd. His crystalline form caught the light and scattered it, creating an aurora of deadly beauty around him. The betting boards flickered as last-minute wagers poured in, the odds shifting even further in his favor. Graviton charged the moment the signal was given, its massive form moving with surprising speed for its size. Krasthul didn't move. He stood, analyzing, as the war beast closed the distance. At the last possible moment, his crystalline arm shifted, molecular bonds rearranging to form a blade sharper than monomolecular steel. One cut. That's all it took. Graviton's momentum carried it past Krasthul before it realized it had been struck. The war beast took 3 more steps before its upper body slid cleanly away from its lower half, both parts toppling in different directions. The entire fight had lasted 6.4 seconds. As medical drones rushed to collect the fallen challenger, Krasthul turned and walked back to his chamber, his crystal armor already reabsorbing and restructuring the blade. He had no need to celebrate. Victory wasn't an achievement, it was simply the optimal outcome. In the viewing gallery, a small group of new arrivals from Earth watched the replay on the holoscreen. Among them, a woman in tourist clothes made notes on her phone, a slight smile playing across her face. The perfect warrior had no way of knowing that this simple expression would soon become the greatest challenge of his fighting career. The betting parlor of Nexus 7's fighting pits fell into an uneasy silence as Sarah Chen wandered through its holographic displays, her I Heart Earth backpack bouncing cheerfully against her shoulder. The room's regular patrons, hardened gamblers, retired gladiators, and professional oddsmakers watched in disbelief as she stopped at each projection, occasionally taking photos like a tourist at a museum. "Excuse me," she called out to a hovering information drone, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Could you explain how the crystal growth rating affects the odds calculation? I'm trying to understand the betting system." The drone's processors whirred in confusion. Most visitors to the betting parlor understood that information requests about fight mechanics were typically precursors to death. Those who asked too many questions often became intimate with those mechanics firsthand. Sarah pulled up the replay of Krastvul's latest fight on her personal holoscreen, the one that had ended moments ago. She studied the 6-second slaughter with the focused attention of a scholar examining an ancient text. Her fingers traced the arc of the champion's crystal blade through the air. And that's when the other patrons noticed something disturbing. She was smiling. "Fascinating application of molecular reorganization," she muttered, making more notes on her phone. "The crystalline structure allows for instant weapon formation without sacrificing defensive capabilities, though his footwork could use some refinement. A massive Correxian battlemaster, his armor bearing the scars of 1,000 fights, leaned toward his companion. Is the human suffering from atmospheric poisoning? Should we call medical?" "No," his companion, a retired arena trainer, whispered back. "That's how they always look before they do something incredibly stupid or impossibly brilliant." "Sometimes both." Sarah approached the registration desk, where a Valaxian administrator was processing death certificates from the day's matches. The administrator's compound eyes widened as the human stopped before them, still wearing that unsettling expression. "Hi there." Sarah's cheerful greeting caused several nearby aliens to flinch. "I'd like to register for the next available match against Krastvul, please." The administrator's translator glitched, requiring 3 reboots before they could respond. "You wish to challenge the champion, the Crystal Death, the perfect weapon." "That's right." Sarah was already filling out the registration form on her holopad. "I noticed his crystal formation rate drops by 0.03% after executing a precision cut, with the right timing that creates an exploitable window for counter-pressure point techniques." The betting parlor erupted into chaos. Odds makers scrambled to adjust their boards as news of the human challenger spread through the station's communication networks. The initial odds of 1,000 to 1 against her caused a surge of speculation credits to flood the system. "Professional background?" the administrator asked, mandated by registration protocols. "Oh, I run a small martial arts studio back on Earth," Sarah replied, pulling up images on her phone. "Here's my advanced class practicing Zerog adaptations of traditional techniques, and this is last year's interplanetary friendship tournament. Look, we made t-shirts." The administrator stared at images of humans and aliens practicing lethal combat techniques while wearing matching shirts with smiley faces on them. Their risk assessment algorithms threatened to crash. As Sarah completed her registration, a gruff voice cut through the commotion. "You're signing your own death warrant, human." The Correxian battlemaster had approached, his cybernetic eye scanning her for signs of advanced weaponry or hidden enhancements. Sarah turned to him, and her smile somehow grew wider. "Actually, I'm signing up for a wonderful learning opportunity. Would you like to join us for dinner?" "My treat. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the arena, and I noticed a fantastic-looking noodle place on level 3 that advertises all species welcome." The battlemaster backed away slowly, making a sign against evil that hadn't been used in his culture for 3 centuries. In the champion's quarters, Krastvul received the challenger notification. For the first time in his fighting career, his perfect crystal armor developed a hairline crack. Krastvul's preparation chamber had never felt so inadequate. The holographic displays surrounding him flickered with centuries of human combat footage, each video adding another layer of confusion to his perfectly ordered mind. His analysis routine, unchanged for 200 cycles, had fallen into chaos. "Display Earth Combat Archives. Sequential order," he commanded, his crystalline form reflecting the light of dozens of simultaneous broadcasts. The chamber's AI compiled the data, starting with humanity's earliest recorded fights. The first sequences showed primitive contests, two humans in a roped square, wearing padded gloves, deliberately restricting themselves to a fraction of their lethal capabilities. Yet they emerged from these voluntary limitations stronger, more refined. It defied logic. Pause sequence. Kraz full ordered, focusing on a particular moment. A human fighter had just rendered their opponent unconscious with a precisely executed technique. But instead of completing the kill, they helped their fallen opponent stand, embracing them as if they were clutch mates. Analysis. Behavioral anomaly, he muttered. Cross-reference. Other species' combat traditions. The AI complied, displaying thousands of combat rituals from across the galaxy. Every rational species followed the same pattern. Combat ended in death or submission. Victory meant dominance, yet humans treated it like something else entirely. New footage appeared. A training facility called a dojo. Children, barely old enough to form basic neural pathways, practiced killing techniques while laughing. Their instructor, his future opponent, Sarah Chen, guided them through movements that could shatter spines or crush windpipes, all while maintaining that unsettling expression of joy. Krasthul's crystal armor creaked as stress patterns formed along its surface. Display. Human facial expressions. Combat situations. The chamber filled with images of bared teeth, expressions his species had evolved to recognize as immediate death threats. Humans display them constantly, before, during, and after combat. They smiled while striking, smiled while being struck, smiled while executing moves that could end lives. Cross-reference. Human social interactions, non-combat. The same expressions appeared in footage of humans sharing meals, greeting friends, expressing affection. Krasthul's combat computer struggled to parse the contradiction. How could the same expression convey both lethal intent and friendship? He focused on recent footage from Sarah's dojo. She was demonstrating a throwing technique that could easily paralyze an opponent. Yet her students showed no fear. They stepped forward eagerly, asking to be thrown, treating potentially fatal moves as learning experiences. Computer, analyze. Probability of victory based on standard combat metrics. The AI processed for several moments longer than usual. Error, insufficient data. Human combat efficiency appears to operate independently of emotional state. Traditional prediction models unreliable. A new video began playing. Footage from a recent tournament. Sarah's students, a mix of humans and aliens, bowed to each other before engaging in lethal combat. After each match, regardless of outcome, they gathered for what the subtitle described as a group photo. They stood together, winners and losers alike, displaying their teeth in that incomprehensible expression of joy. Krasthul's perfect posture faltered for the first time in decades. His crystalline armor, grown through countless battles to be impervious to physical attack, developed microscopic fractures as his emotional control wavered. Computer, final analysis. What is the purpose of human combat? Insufficient data, the AI responded. Human combat patterns suggest simultaneous and contradictory goals. Maximum efficiency in technique, minimum efficiency in application. They appear to deliberately prolong engagement for enjoyment. The chamber fell silent as Krasthul processed this information. In 200 cycles, he had perfected the art of ending fights in the most efficient way possible. Yet humans, capable of the same efficiency, chose not to. They had mastered the power to kill and turned it into entertainment. As his next match approached, the champion of Nexus 7 faced an unsettling revelation. For the first time in his fighting career, he was going to face an opponent whose motives he couldn't understand. And in combat, as in nature, the unknown was the deadliest enemy of all. The pre-fight measuring chamber of Nexus 7's arena complex had never hosted such an unusual scene. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the scanning platform, cheerfully chatting with the measurement officials while they tried to calibrate their equipment for human biological readings. "So those sensory stocks," Sarah asked a particularly nervous Xenovian technician, "are they naturally bioluminescent, or is that a cultural modification?" "The patterns are absolutely beautiful." The technician's stalks flickered in confusion as they adjusted the quantum scale. No challenger had ever commented on their appearance before. Most were too busy updating their final testaments. "Please remain still for molecular density scanning," the chamber's AI announced. "Oh, sorry about that." Sarah settled into position but continued talking. "You know, this reminds me of getting my first X-ray back on Earth. I was 7, broke my arm trying to do a backflip off the swings. The technician gave me a sticker afterward. Do you guys do stickers here?" The measuring chamber's door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and the room's temperature dropped several degrees. Krasthul ducked through the entrance, his crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the sterile walls. The officials immediately backed away, following standard safety protocols for proximity to the champion. Sarah's face lit up. "Oh wow, the Holovids really don't do your crystal structure justice. The light refraction patterns are incredible." She hopped off the scanning platform, completely ignoring the safety force field that was supposed to separate challengers from the champion. Krasthul's combat computers ran emergency recalculations as the human approached. No opponent had ever willingly moved closer to him before the fight. His armor unconsciously shifted into a defensive configuration. "I have so many questions about your molecular reformation process," Sarah continued, circling him with unconcealed fascination. "Did you know your crystal lattice shows signs of quantum entanglement? The implications for energy transfer during combat are fascinating. Oh, and your diet must be incredible. What's your mineral intake like?" The champion of Nexus 7 found himself taking a step backward, an action so unprecedented that 3 different recording drones glitched simultaneously. "You wish to discuss nutrition before combat?" "Of course. Proper mineral balance is crucial for crystalline growth patterns. Here, I brought some research papers on silicon-based life forms." Sarah pulled a datapad from her backpack. "I especially love Dr. Martinez's theory about piezoelectric properties in crystal warriors. Would you mind if I took some readings?" "For science." Krasthul's perfect posture wavered as Sarah produced a handheld scanner. His combat computer was throwing up warning signals he'd never seen before. The human's casual disregard for his lethal capabilities violated every combat principle he'd ever encountered. "You show no fear," he stated, trying to regain his emotional equilibrium. "Why would I? This is such an amazing opportunity." Sarah's smile widened, causing nearby officials to flinch. "How often does one get to study advanced crystal formation techniques up close? Plus, I have some ideas about incorporating your molecular reformation principles into our advanced classes back home. Would you be interested in doing a guest lecture sometime?" The champion's armor creaked audibly. Guest lecture. Home. The implications of surviving combat had never been part of his pre-fight calculations before. "Final measurements required," the chamber's eye announced, its tone suggesting desperate desire to return to normal protocols. "Oh right, sorry. Got a bit carried away there." Sarah bounced back to the scanning platform. "But seriously, we should grab coffee after the match. I know this great place on level 4 that serves silicon-compatible beverages. Their mineral blend is supposedly amazing." As Krasthul watched the human submit to the final scans while humming what she called a workout playlist, he realized his perfect combat record faced a threat he never trained for, an opponent who viewed lethal combat as a networking opportunity. In the observation deck above, the betting officials frantically adjusted their odds. They had no protocols for calculating the survival chances of someone who tried to schedule a coffee date with the perfect weapon. The arena's force fields hummed to life as Sarah bounded into the combat zone, performing what appeared to be casual stretching exercises. The crowd watched in bewildered silence as she touched her toes, rolled her shoulders, and did a few small hops while admiring the arena's architecture. "The acoustics in here are amazing," she called out to Krasthul, her voice echoing across the deadly space. "Do you ever host concerts? The resonance would be perfect for classical music." The champion entered with his traditional deadly grace, his crystalline form prepared for instant molecular reformation. Yet his usually perfect battle stance showed subtle signs of uncertainty. His opponent was doing arm circles while discussing entertainment venues. "Begin combat sequence," the arena AI announced in its standard monotone. 1 second. Sarah held up a finger, finishing her stretch routine. "Proper warm-up is important. Don't want to pull anything during a deathmatch, right?" She winked at Krasthul, causing a small crack to appear in his shoulder plating. The champion initiated his standard opening sequence, his right arm transforming into a blade sharp enough to split atoms. He launched forward with perfect efficiency, a strike that had ended 112 fights in their first second. Sarah flowed around the blade like water around a stone, her movement an elegant fusion of earth martial arts. "Oh, fascinating technique. But you're telegraphing the molecular shift slightly. See how your crystal lattice ripples about 0.3 seconds before reformation." Krasthul's combat computer nearly crashed. His opponent had not only evaded his perfect strike, but was offering technical criticism. He shifted his blade into a defensive array, trying to process this unprecedented situation. "The crystalline reformation is gorgeous, though," Sarah continued, moving through his guard with a complex combination of techniques. "Have you considered incorporating more fluid dynamics? Like this." She demonstrated a circular movement that somehow turned his own crystal momentum against him, sending him stumbling forward. The crowd gasped. No one had ever seen the perfect weapon stumble. "Sorry about that." Sarah actually helped steady him before dancing back into fighting stance. "But do you see what I mean? Your crystal structure has amazing potential for redirecting energy. Here, try to hit me again, and I'll show you." Krasthul's battle protocols warred with his growing confusion. He launched another attack, his entire arm becoming a deadly crystal spear. Sarah moved inside his guard, her movements precise yet seemingly playful. "Watch this," she said, making contact with his crystalline form at exactly the right angle. The kinetic energy traveled through his molecular structure in a beautiful wave pattern, causing his own crystals to chime like musical notes. "Isn't that cool? The harmonics are perfect." The champion's perfect focus began to splinter. His opponent was treating lethal combat like an interactive physics lesson. She moved through his deadliest techniques with the enthusiasm of a teacher, demonstrating basic principles to a student. "Your foundation is incredibly stable," Sarah noted, evading another crystal blade while apparently taking mental notes. "But you might be overcompensating for your center of gravity. Try shifting your weight distribution about 2 degrees forward. Yes, just like that." The betting systems were in chaos. Odds makers couldn't calculate survival probabilities for a fighter who stopped mid-battle to discuss biomechanical optimization. Several aliens in the crowd began recording the fight, not for its violence, but as what appeared to be an impromptu masterclass in crystal warrior techniques. Krasthul launched his most complex attack sequence, crystalline blades forming and reforming in impossible patterns. Sarah navigated through them with fluid grace, beaming with genuine delight. "This is amazing," she exclaimed, ducking under a crystal blade while pointing out its molecular structure. "We absolutely have to collaborate on a paper about crystal reformation dynamics in combat applications. Your techniques could revolutionize materials science." In that moment, Krasthul realized he wasn't just fighting a human. He was participating in what she apparently considered a very enthusiastic peer review session.
The fight had reached its 7th minute, 6 minutes and 42 seconds longer than any of Krasthul's previous matches. Sweat glistened on Sarah's forehead as she wove through his crystal formations, while fracture lines had begun appearing across his armor's surface. Neither development was physical fatigue. They were symptoms of something far more destabilizing. That last sequence was brilliant. Sarah called out, her breathing only slightly elevated. The crystal harmonics during molecular reformation were perfect. Though you might want to watch your left side when. She cut off abruptly as one of his blades finally found its mark, opening a clean slice along her arm. The crowd leaned forward, expecting the usual ending. Instead, Sarah held up her hand in a gesture that confused every combat protocol in the arena's history. "Time out," she announced cheerfully, actually sitting down cross-legged in the middle of the combat zone. That was a great hit. But we should probably take care of this before it affects the quality of the match. Krasthul's combat computer threw up hundreds of error messages. There was no timeout in arena combat. His crystalline form stood frozen, blade still extended, as Sarah rummaged through her I Heart Earth backpack. "Ah, here we go." She pulled out a first aid kit. "Would you mind helping me with this? It's a bit awkward to bandage one-handed." The champion of Nexus 7, terror of the fighting pits, destroyer of 1,000 challengers, found himself kneeling beside his opponent as she taught him basic first aid. His perfect crystal blade had automatically reformed into fingers that now held antiseptic wipes with bewildered care. "You know," Sarah commented while guiding his crystalline hands through the bandaging process, "this reminds me of my first teaching injury. One of my young students got so excited about mastering a new technique that they accidentally broke my finger. They felt terrible about it, but it became a great lesson about control and responsibility." Krasthul's armor creaked as new stress fractures formed. "You continued teaching after injury." "Of course, it's all part of the learning process." She tested the bandage's tightness. "Perfect. You're really good at this. The precision control of your crystal structures would be amazing for medical applications. Have you ever considered part-time work in a hospital?" The champion's combat computer finally crashed. 200 cycles of perfect emotional control shattered as his mind tried to process a being who could shift from lethal warrior to medical instructor in the space of a heartbeat. "I don't understand," he admitted, his voice carrying an emotion he hadn't expressed since his creation, confusion. "You possess the skill to kill, yet you choose to heal. You have the power to destroy, yet you prefer to teach. What are you?" Sarah's smile softened as she stood, offering her hand to help him up. Another gesture that sent the combat protocols into chaos. "I'm just someone who believes that true mastery isn't about how well you can harm others, but how well you can control that ability and choose not to." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the perfect weapon accepted help standing from his opponent. His crystalline armor, designed to reflect all external threats, had begun to show deep fractures from an entirely internal conflict. "Now," Sarah continued, bouncing back into a fighting stance with undiminished enthusiasm, "want to try that last sequence again. I think if we adjust the angular momentum of your crystal formation by about 15 degrees, we could create some fascinating resonance patterns." As Krasthul resumed his combat stance, his perfect warrior's mind faced a devastating realization. He wasn't fighting an opponent trying to defeat him. He was facing something far more dangerous, someone trying to understand him. In the observation deck, the betting computers finally gave up trying to calculate odds and displayed a simple message. Human probability calculations temporarily suspended. Reality coefficients exceeded. The arena's environmental systems struggled to keep up with the crystalline debris floating through the air. Each shard caught the light, creating a glittering cloud around the two fighters. But these weren't pieces broken off in combat. They were falling from Krasthul's armor as his perfect composure continued to crack. "Your crystal reformation rate is dropping," Sarah noted with professional concern. "Are you getting enough calcium? I know a great nutritionist who specializes in silicon-based life forms. She could probably design a supplement program for you." The champion's movements had lost their mechanical precision. His combat computer, after crashing and rebooting 3 times, had given up trying to predict human behavior patterns and switched to emergency protocols. But even those were failing as Sarah continued to defy every combat logic he'd ever known. "Look at this pattern." She traced a finger along one of his crystal blades between strikes, somehow managing to maintain both perfect combat form and scholarly interest. The molecular structure shows signs of stress. When was the last time you took a vacation? Vacation. The word hit harder than any physical blow. The concept of voluntary rest, of choosing not to fight, had never entered his consciousness in 200 cycles of combat. Krasthul's voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. "Fighting is what I am." "No," Sarah corrected gently, flowing around his increasingly erratic attacks. "Fighting is what you do. There's a difference." The statement struck him like a quantum destabilizer to his core. His crystal armor began resonating at frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, creating haunting chimes throughout the arena. But efficiency? He started, his perfect combat rhetoric failing him. Is just one way to measure success. Sarah completed, actually stopping mid-fight to pull up some images on her phone. "See these. My students competing in last year's tournament. Some won, some lost, but look at their faces." Krasthul's crystal-enhanced vision focused on the images. Humans and aliens, victors and defeated, all wearing those terrifying teeth-baring expressions of joy. His combat computer initiated another emergency shutdown. He struggled to process the revelation. You can separate the act of combat from the purpose of destruction. You fight without hatred. Kill without malice. Teach lethal techniques with love. Now you're getting it. Sarah beamed, her smile somehow more devastating than any weapon he'd ever faced. Combat can be art, science, sport, or dance. The technique isn't what matters. It's the intent behind it. That's when Krasthul finally understood why humans were truly terrifying. They hadn't evolved beyond violence. They'd mastered it so completely that they could treat it as a recreational activity. Their greatest strength wasn't their ability to kill, but their ability to choose when not to. His perfect crystal armor, formed through countless lethal battles, began to crack not from physical damage, but from the fundamental restructuring of his worldview. The being known as the perfect weapon faced an impossible truth. Perfection without purpose was meaningless. "I forfeit," he announced, his voice resonating through the stunned arena. Sarah's response shattered the last remnants of his combat programming. "Great match. Now about that coffee. I have so many questions about your crystal formation techniques. Oh, and would you be interested in teaching a guest seminar at my dojo? We could do a whole workshop on molecular reformation in combat applications." As the arena's AI struggled to process the first forfeit in its history, Krasthul realized he wasn't just facing a skilled warrior. He was facing a being who could turn the galaxy's deadliest combat arena into a networking opportunity for academic collaboration. In the observation deck, the betting systems displayed their final message before completely shutting down. Error. Human combat psychology exception. Reality requires recalibration. The perfect weapon had finally met something more terrifying than any opponent. A human who saw deadly combat as a chance to make friends. 2 cycles after the legendary match that crashed every betting system in Nexus 7, Sarah Chen's dojo on Earth received its most unusual student. Krasthul ducked through the reinforced doorway, his crystalline form now adorned with something the galaxy's combat circuits were still struggling to process: a white belt. "Remember, everyone," Sarah announced to our mixed class of humans and aliens, "today's lesson focuses on crystal reformation techniques. Our guest instructor will demonstrate how molecular control can enhance both offensive and defensive capabilities." The champion of Nexus 7, terror of the fighting pits, found himself standing before a group of students who showed no fear, only that uniquely human expression of excited curiosity. A young girl in the front row actually waved at him. "Before we begin," Sarah continued, "would anyone like to ask Krasthul questions about Crystal Warrior techniques?" Every hand shot up, including several tentacles and photosensitive appendages. The perfect weapon, who had never answered a question in his 200 cycles of combat, found himself explaining crystal formation patterns to a 7-year-old human who wanted to know if he could make sparkly butterflies. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he could. The key to molecular reformation, he explained, his combat protocols now repurposed for education, is understanding that structure follows intent. His arm transformed into an iridescent crystalline butterfly, causing delighted gasps from the students. For 200 cycles, my intent was solely focused on combat efficiency. I never considered alternative applications. Sarah beamed from the side of the training mat. "And what have we learned about efficiency?" "That it is not an end in itself," Krasthul recited, still amazed at how natural the words felt. "True mastery lies not in how perfectly we can fight, but in how perfectly we can choose when not to." The lesson progressed, with students practicing basic crystal adaptation techniques. Krasthul moved among them, making corrections with the same precision he once used to end fights. But now each movement was guided by a different purpose, not to destroy, but to develop. "Excellent progress, everyone," Sarah called out as the class neared its end. "Now, who's ready for the group photo?" The former champion watched in fascination as his students gathered around him, all wearing those initially terrifying teeth-baring expressions. Sarah held up her phone, its camera ready to capture the moment. "Okay, Krasthul," she encouraged, "remember what we practiced." The perfect weapon, destroyer of 1,000 challengers, master of molecular combat, attempted his first smile. The resulting expression caused 3 different species to dive for cover and triggered 17 different emergency protocols in the dojo's security system. "Much better than last time," Sarah said encouragingly, while helping several fainted students back to their feet. "You're getting the hang of it. The crystal formations around your mouth region only caused minor psychological trauma this time." As the class recovered and gathered for another photo attempt, Krasthul realized something profound. In all his cycles of combat, he had never felt more powerful than in this moment, teaching young beings how to create rather than destroy, watching them transform fear into fascination. "One more thing," Sarah announced after the photo session. "Next week, we're hosting an interplanetary friendship tournament. Krasthul has agreed to judge the crystal formation category. And yes, we ordered him a special judge t-shirt." The former champion looked down at his crystalline form, wondering how he would wear a t-shirt. But he had learned not to question human innovations. After all, this was the species that had turned the galaxy's deadliest warrior into a kid's martial arts instructor through the power of friendly conversation and persistent smiling. As his students filed out, still chattering excitedly about crystal butterflies, Krasthul understood at last. Humans weren't terrifying because of their ability to fight. They were terrifying because of their ability to make even the most lethal combat into an opportunity for connection, education, and, most frighteningly of all, friendship. The perfect weapon had become something far more dangerous, a teacher who smiled.